We're going to push straight through. We've got Kezam coming up next. And we'll hear from him, and I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll hear his story.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Oh, I've turned around and there's actually a lot of people back there. It's weird when you get here. You get here early and no one's in the room, and you're like, "Oh shit, is anyone going to show up?" But that's awesome. Thanks for coming. There was a very long list of people who were thanked in the opening. I'd like to not repeat all those names because I can't remember. But thank you to everyone who put it on. Thanks to Bobby for the invite. It's greatly appreciated. I should not have gone second because after that it dawns on me I'm going to appear to be one of the most incredibly selfish people on the face of the earth at this point. Before I get into my own selfishness, I really have to agree. I'm always astounded by the amount of money that gets spent on graffiti removal. And the thing I love about the volume of money that gets spent on graffiti removal is every time I hear that argument, the second thing I hear is that's money that could have been better spent. And that's the part I love, because I love how these people in council, sorry to people in council, council is a very complicated organism, right? It's like, okay, if you can spend that money better, why don't you just go ahead and do that? That's the part I never understand. You control the budget, not us. You insist that it can be spent better, but you continue to throw it away on bullshit graffiti removal. Sorry, I swear sometimes. Anyway, all right, so that's my critique of spending $5 million a year on graffiti writing. I've always been about letters. I'm a letters guy. Partially I'm lucky to be able to do that. I don't get into too many other things other than letters, partially because I'm not invested in making a career out of graffiti writing. I don't diss that or anything. I like to see graffiti writers go on to do that if that's what they want to do. I like seeing people diversifying and changing. But personally for me, I'm primarily interested in letters. This is my first piece from 1989. It was painted with the help of a friend who was an old school sort of Melbourne graffiti writer back then. So that meant he'd been around for like 4 years and started in 85 or something. It's a bit hard to see. The first piece is actually it says Ness. It looks blue and green and it's underneath that. So some arsehole who lived up the street came and went over it.
Let it go, man.
I know, I need to let it go. The story gets worse. So this was painted underneath like on a bridge pillar, and so when a road was built going over the top. And I never managed to actually get a photo of it because this was back in the days where I wasn't organised and I didn't understand the value of documenting my work. And about 4 or 5 years later, I finally, I really shouldn't be admitting all this on video, but I stole a camera as you did back then and started documenting everything I painted. And I tried to go and get this piece and it had overgrown, right? So they'd built a service road to build this, but there was all these trees that came up and you couldn't get back down there. And I knew that first piece was there. And then I went back to Melbourne after, I think, having not been there for about 6 or 7 years. In 2009, 2010, I believe it was a honeymoon. And they had built another freeway next to this one and put in a new pillar. And so in the course of doing that, they had cleared the service road that got down here. And I got to Melbourne, drove over this road, and I was like, oh, this is a new bridge. They might have more pillars to paint down there. So I went down there to check it out, and this was visible. So I managed to get the photo some 20 years later. I'm pretty sure this was a black final outline. It's people who paint graffiti will get the significance of having the first piece. I know a lot of graffiti writers who don't have their first piece, and it's a little tragic. For the first 10 or so, 12 years, whatever it was, of my graffiti writing, I would say I practiced graffiti pretty much in the way it was standardly practiced. I don't think there was really anything special about the first 10 years of my painting. I don't really think there's anything special with any of my painting. So this was kind of 1990, a couple years later. I don't know if things have advanced any. They've probably gone downhill a little bit. I kind of love this photo. I was probably about this big when I painted this, and I remember dragging a trash can around the back to try and stand up and get up taller and stuff to try and paint as high as everybody else. This is a very bad piece. I love, though, that some other older graffiti writers came and made fun of me, saying that I'm burning everything and that I should continue. At that age, I have to say I didn't recognize the irony of it. I thought they were genuinely supporting me. No, they were not. So this period of Melbourne sort of graffiti and a lot of other graffiti writing cultures around the world, it was all pretty much predominantly concentrated on trains, tracksides, things like that. So most of my works appeared there and, are sort of long gone in these respects. This is 1994, first road trip to Brisbane, I suppose. This was painted in some pretty famous drains. This is sort of more tracksides. I've used a lot of names over the years, actually. So I think you can see things are starting to shift, things are getting perhaps a little better. This is all done with pretty bad paint, I must say. Most of this is painted with like Plasticoat, Tucson, stolen off brands of like car paints and stuff like that. I'm always amazed. Kids these days, I feel like an old man saying that, they really don't realise how lucky they have it, right? Like, people sort of are like, all these new brands of paint out there, and I think they're really good because they can do something with a fat cap. It's like, try painting with a skinny cap on a Plasticoat can that keeps skipping. There was certainly a train period towards the late 90s, early 2000s, where I started getting more into more concentrated on trains and painting panels. It was a bit short-lived because I ended up relocating to the United States and took a bit of a break for a couple of years to work on other stuff. There was certainly a train period there. So I moved to New York in 2002, 2003, something like that. And this was sort of, I guess, a break in the way I had been painting for a very long time. And part of the reason that I sort of shifted what I was doing, and I think this is a point where I started becoming more conscious of what I was painting and starting to think more consciously about it. I really got sick of flat letters. I really got sick of arrows and wild style and all those traditional, typical things that happen in graffiti. I got really tired of strong black outlines, all that kind of stuff. And the reason I got so tired of that was because I felt everybody was doing it. And when I was in New York, this is portion of, probably it might be hard to tell from this photo, but this is on the 5 Points building. So this was the sort of graffiti hub in New York for a long time, very famous kind of legal building. They basically had the whole building, anyone could go and paint. It was awesome. But you'd walk around the building and everybody was doing these traditional wild style things, trying to get, really crazy. And so I remember sort of being inspired a lot by Revs and Cost with this idea. And Revs and Cost were, I assume people know, but in case they don't, two pretty well-known New York City graffiti writers, now street artists. And they started doing a lot of these very big, bold, simple aesthetics. So one of the things they started doing was putting these stickers on the back of the pedestrian boxes that just said Revs and Cost, big red letters, block letters on white background, very simple. They started doing a lot of big, rolly, buff paint pieces and stuff like that. And I sort of thought, oh, what would be the graffiti piece version of this? And so this way, when I started experimenting with 3D letters, and the initial idea, I actually created this name Kezam for this very purpose. The initial idea was just to produce a logo, essentially. Block letters, no variation, very same outline, very simple block letters. And I sort of did this once, and I kind of didn't dislike the piece. I thought it was kind of interesting. It's always tricky when you're trying to do something that you haven't done before, pulls you out of your comfort zone. And then once I realized, oh, it's actually not that hard to do a piece without a final outline. How can I stylize this a little more? So I went back down this road of like stylizing, but now a 3D piece. This sort of proceeded for quite a while, obviously, but again, sort of eventually felt I was going pretty much down this same road of trying to intensify the style of things. And I used to have a philosophy at this point of never really painting the same piece twice. So a lot of this work was like constant outlining, redrawing, planning, trying to think about how to shift things again. And that sort of changed again when I came here and started thinking about, what sort of principles should govern or could govern the sort of production of a series of pieces. And I wanted to go back to that. I have a good friend, a German friend, who his philosophy is to sort of focus on doing one thing and just keep developing it and developing it. And it's really interesting. You see his pieces that he produces, every week, and they all kind of look the same. But then when you compare them at, say, January 2014 and January 2015, you just see how it's gradually been perfected and more stylized. And so the last few years, this is actually the sort of principle I've been adopting. Let's just pick one sort of basic blueprint design, and let's just keep spinning it and seeing where it goes. So this was kind of probably one of the first times I think I did this sort of outline and this kind of style. The idea was to have a 3D piece that was very simple and one solid piece, right? So almost as if it were a sculpture that was carved from one stone. This is what had happened to this design by 2015. Sorry, this is probably illegally done at Corbyn's or something in the little box. Sorry, Bobby, I should apologise. And this is what had sort of happened with this one idea about a year later. You can see how the overlays and the sort of detailing, what would be bubbles, inside letter designs, whatever you want to call it, there's getting more colours in there. They're sort of shifting. The backgrounds are getting more attention, I think. And more 3D elements are being incorporated into the letters. This is again another iteration, sort of further iterations, I suppose, of the one idea. So starting to get into this idea of letters, 3D letter going into the wall, sort of coming back out, more interactions again with backgrounds. That sort of little letter going into the wall sort of became the idea of, I can carve out the sort of letter. And for a long time, I was struggling to figure out how to do it with the Z in the middle. The K and the M were a bit easier to navigate because of the angle that they sit on, but the Z took a bit longer. So this is the first time the 3D spun with the Z being carved out in the middle as well, and a sort of more unified, consistent feel across the letters. And this is another recent version of that. Again, you sort of see more 3D elements popping out. The orbs are coming into it. Less reliance on droplets, which some are very sad about, but I'm okay with it. And so this is the sort of final image I'll leave you with, this one sort of idea that's been governing the creative process. And what sort of happens when you push one thing and sort of stick with it for a couple of years. So this is September, October, sometime around then, 2015. That piece looks really bad and embarrassing to me now. And then a year later, September, October 2016 in Melbourne, you can see how it's the same basic idea in there, but very different sort of look. And then a more recent one from 2017, again in Melbourne, in Fitzroy, final KZM piece. All right, I'll leave you on that. Thank you very much.